Welcome to episode 8 of the Backseat Fighter podcast. I am so excited for today's episode because we're talking all things UFC 310 going down this weekend. The main event between Pantoja and Asakura, the former rising champion, coming over to the UFC to compete for the flyweight championship of the world. I've got great news. This episode is going up on Spotify. It's the first one to do so. And I'm just so excited for all the audio listeners to be involved now in the Backseat Fighter podcast. And third and finally, this episode is going to bring me some competitive further because I am going to be competing as CHAT GPT AI to see who can predict these fights correctly. You guys know how I feel about the I told you so, I got the prediction right type culture in MMA. But I thought it'd be fun to compete against AI this episode. So let's get straight into the main event right here. Pantoja versus Asakura. Now, I am so excited for this fight because I'm a huge fan of both of these guys. And to be honest, I didn't know much about Asakura coming into this fight. Before he signed to the UFC, I wasn't really aware of his ability, his knockout power, and his career as a whole. But this guy is legit. But let me get into Pantoja first, and then we'll analyze Asakura after that. Now, Pantoja has been on an absolute tear. I think he's been in 3 title fights, 3 consecutive victories. He won the belt, obviously, and then defended it most recently against Steve Eryk. And that's where I want to base most of my analysis in this fight, because a lot of people thought Eryk may have, pipped him, may have gotten the edge, and may have won 3 of those 5 rounds, and to perhaps deserved the victory there at that fight. But I believe Pantoja won round 1, 3, and 5 in that fight. And listen, Eryk was very close. Pantoja took shots and Eryk looked great, especially on the feet. The technical ability to catch Pantoja on the way in, those deadly elbows that cut the forehead of Pantoja open. I mean, Eryk did damage and proved he was legit. But let's get into Pantoja's performance in that fight. For me, it proved so many things we already knew about Pantoja. He's a super high IQ fighter. Okay, he mixes it up so well, perhaps better than anybody in the UFC right now, but John Jones. And he also showed how tough he was. We know Pantoja is a dog of a fighter. He's able to take damage. He's a fighter that uses his chin as part of his strategy. He takes a couple to give a couple. And, it works out so well for him. He showed his immense ability, as always, to put pressure on his opponent, to back them up against the fence, to force them into submission, to force them onto the ground and force them into his wheelhouse, force them into his fight that he wants to impose on his opponents. And obviously, he just showed the absolute dog that he has inside of him. But more technically, in that fight, I think the best thing I noticed for him, especially early on in the round and in the first round, is his knees to the body, especially when he's exiting the clinch. Now, he'll get into an exchange with Eryk, especially in that first round. And, to make sure that he's safe on exit, he'll just throw the knee straight up in the middle and just land straight into the belly, the soft part of Eryk, to make sure not only he's doing insane amounts of damage to his opponent, but also that he's safely exiting that clinch, as I said before. And he also did it in a way that I haven't necessarily seen a lot of fighters do. Pantoja's always going to go for the takedowns. And even in that first round, he gets a takedown kind of, as he defends it on the fence, and as kind of that takedown attempt fails, instead of just disengaging completely, he kind of frames off of Steve Eryk right there and just throws a knee straight to the ribs, which I think is just such a smart and high IQ play, especially considering the gas tank of Eryk. Now, Eryk didn't slow down necessarily. He was still going pretty hard until that 5th round. And but I think even just those little percentage points of energy that you can sap out of your opponent, especially with these heavy knees that Pantoja throws, I think it was just excellent. I also wanted to mention, as it's going to be very relevant to this Asakura fight as well, I thought that Pantoja in that fight did an amazing job, especially in the early part of the fight, and then reintroduced it towards the end. I would say in that maybe that late 3rd round, is his ability to jab and then throw the lead calf kick. So he would jab, and as he's throwing that damaging, really heavy lead calf kick, almost Justin Gaethje-esque, he was able not only to obviously damage his opponent, to hit that perineal nerve. For people that don't know, there's a nerve that runs down the front of the shin, and it's kind of like the funny bone in your elbow. So if you can hit that with a calf kick, with your own shin connecting with the meat part of their front leg, it's going to send like a wave, a kind of fuzziness, and make that front foot numb so they're immobile and they can't move around, and therefore easier to hit and win the fight against. He's doing that with that lead left kick, but he's also getting off the center line with his head. So he's throwing that, his head's off the center line. And, you know, Usyk was able to start timing it a little bit and start being able to throw that straight right down the pipe to counter him. But it already did so much damage by the time that Usyk made that read. And I just thought he was such a well game planned fighter in that fight. Now, obviously, Pantoja is not a guy that's going to look like, you know, the most technical boxer or the most technical kickboxer or the most technical Muay Thai artist or necessarily wrestler. But he's one of those people that does such a good job with pressure, has a great chin, and can mix it up. You know, he's going to throw looping shots to your head to make you cover up. The next time he might start throwing leg kicks and then start swinging wild hooks to the body. And slowly but surely he's going to start damaging you and wearing you out. And he's a guy that just drags you into deep waters, both figuratively and literally, because he's got such a good ability of getting to your back and pulling you into his lap so that you can't get up. And, you know, Steve Usyk in that fight did a great job of staying high when Pantoja would bring him down onto his lap. He would stay high and get on the chest to try and reverse the position. But I think in this fight, you know, if Pantoja gets a hold of Asakura, he's going to be able to hold him down and grapple him. And that's why I see a lot of success coming for Pantoja, because I think he's just, you know, first of all, he's just so competitively equipped. You know, he doesn't quit. He's probably got one of the toughest mindsets I've seen in the sport. But that does lead him to kind of trusting his chin a lot. And it could be a weakness in this fight because on entry, he sometimes does swing quite wildly and there isn't a lot of defense going on. He's just trying to back you up against the fence, right? But, you know, against a guy like Asakura and even Usyk is very technical and can pop him on the way in. And then obviously those amazing elbows cut him open. But I think it's a guy that Asakura's probably got a bit more knockout power. It gets a bit dangerous. But on Asakura, let me get to Asakura. So as I mentioned a little bit in my intro here, I didn't know much about Asakura, and I'm so excited that we've got fresh blood, a champion from another promotion coming in and challenging straight away for the title. I think it kind of brings back that really big entertainment factor back to the UFC, that kind of almost, I don't want to say that actually. I was going to say WWE style, but you know, I don't want to say that because that kind of inauthenticates the reality of fighting. I think this is probably, you know, I don't want to go on that rant right now, but I don't want to say that. I just think it brings an entertainment factor back to fighting that sometimes the UFC has been missing over recent cards. And I think this is one of the most stacked cards in a long time, to be fair. But on Asakura, I mean, obviously I didn't know much about this guy before. I'm not going to lie to you. And I think a lot of people didn't know who Asakura was before he signed for the UFC and got matched up with the champ here. But I want to talk about first, probably one of his best performances that I watched in one of those fights, a full fight I watched, was him against Kyoji Horiguchi. They had two fights and I watched the first fight first, and he just does such a good job of distance management in that fight. He showed his ability to move in and out of range really quickly. He's very athletic and very fast, and kind of keeps his knees bent in a way and quite a wide stance. So he's so quick and able to get out in and out of the range. And he has such a good lead knee to the body. And I think at one point he actually fires like a flying knee up the middle with the left knee to kind of, I would say to kind of, you know, try and telegraph to his opponent that he's only going to go high and fly with that knee. But then he just starts throwing it straight to the body and slowing Kyoji Horiguchi down. But then obviously you see his knockout power in this fight. Kyoji Horiguchi tries to cross that void, that term that I've stolen from Demetrius Johnson, tries to cross that void, tries to close the space, and he just smacks him right there with the right hand and rocks him, follows him around the ring because they don't have a cage in Ryzen. And yeah, knees, I believe, to the body. And then at the end, just an absolute beam of a right hand that connects and puts Kyoji Horiguchi out cold. So this guy is an absolute knockout artist. And before I move on to some of his weaknesses, his story is just absolutely amazing. It's something that we've seen on the UFC Countdown, the documentary series that the UFC make on YouTube recently. And he said that he didn't really train any martial arts as a kid, but his older brother was fighting in the street and had beaten all of his opponents in his street fights and didn't have anybody else to fight. So he told Asakura to come outside, his younger brother, and just fight him straight up. And there's even like a pixelated video the UFC Countdown showed where they're literally going at it and trying to kill each other. It's actually quite mental. And, you know, Asakura says that was his first fight ever. And even in that fight, you can see he's slipping really well. He looks like a guy who's trained at least a little bit. And he said from that moment on, he knew he was going to be a professional fighter. And he started taking training very seriously. And obviously that's been so successful for him because I think he was a 2-time champion in Ryzen. And now he's making his debut in the UFC. So I wanted to get that snippet in because his story is just absolutely amazing. But let's talk about his losses in Ryzen and why I think that may play into his performance or at least the result here at UFC 310. So for many people who are fans of the UFC, they probably know Manel Kape, who is also in this division, I believe, in the UFC at the moment. They actually fought in Ryzen and they fought, I think, twice. But in that second fight, I watched the second fight between those two. Manel Kape had a lot of success in the clinch. Whenever they would get in close, he would force the action. Asakura would grab and go into the clinch, and Manel Kape would throw those knees straight into the body, similar to what Pantoja does. Also, I just believe that if the fight is messy, Asakura likes to be in wars, and you'll see he takes damage similar to Pantoja, but he's a bit more technical with the punches, and he does have a bit more power than Pantoja does because his shots are a little bit more straight. So they land quicker and they land harder. But in that fight against Manel Kape, the second one, he gets clipped by Manel Kape's right hand, gets wobbled, gets followed to the ground, held and controlled. You know, he's still kind of in it, but he gets controlled and absolutely ground upon a TKO before the ref has to step in and remove Manel Kape from on top of him. Also, I watched another fight he had, which was the second fight with Kyoji Horiguchi, the one I mentioned he knocked out. In that second fight, Horiguchi's team implemented a new perfect style, I believe, which was to implement leg kicks and attack that lead leg and slow Asakura's movement down. Because in that first fight, his distance management was so good because he was able to go in and out and fast entrance and enter fast into the pocket and leave that pocket very fast as well. So if you attack his lead leg, it's obviously going to slow down his movement, keep him in the pocket for longer and make him more vulnerable. So I really believe that Pantoja, his skill set is kind of made for a guy like Asakura. Now, that doesn't mean that Asakura doesn't have any chance in this fight. I believe Asakura, former champion, deserves to be fighting for the title, in my opinion, and is an absolute knockout artist, can knock anybody on the planet out. I just believe the factors of, first of all, Pantoja's chin, his talent, his competitiveness, all of those, what they would call intangibles. But if we look at the actual tangible and we do our genuine analysis, as a good sports media show should do, and a lot of them don't, let me tell you, Pantoja should implement that kind of strategy that Kyoji Horiguchi showed in that second fight. Attack the lead leg, make sure he's slowed down. And his lead leg, as I mentioned in that Steve Eryk fight, even though it was close, was amazing. That technique is really good. He's got such hard leg kicks, especially to that calf. And I think it's going to be able to slow down Asakura and give Pantoja more of an equal playing ground in terms of the speed on the feet. Furthermore, those knees in the middle, those knees up the middle, those knees in the clinch, especially on the exits, and Manel Kape's ability to control Asakura in that fight and finish him in the ground and pound, that's Pantoja's wheelhouse. That's Pantoja's playground. He wants the fight to go there. So I believe that Alexandre Pantoja is going to win this fight. And you know what we're doing on this show? We are competing with ChatGPT AI. So let me see what ChatGPT said about this fight. ChatGPT also predicted Alexandre Pantoja, but its justification was Pantoja's experience in high-level fights and his well-rounded skill set give him the edge against the aggressive, striking-focused Asakura. Now, whilst I kind of agree with the prediction, I think its justification there on AI is a little bit, it's lacking some nuance and some detail, but that's my job, right? But let's see if we can create some distance. We got the same prediction there, and we'll see if we can get some different answers. So let's go to the co-main event of the evening. Now this, Shavkhat Rakhmonov was supposed to be involved in the main event here at UFC 310 against Belal Muhammad and was supposed to be fighting for the welterweight championship of the world. But instead, he will be fighting Ian Garry in a 5-round co-main event after Belal Muhammad had to pull out due to injury. He had a bone infection in his foot. And so Ian Garry stepped up He was fighting Joaquin Buckley supposedly a week later in, I believe, yes, a week later in Tampa, and instead will be fighting this week. And this is an absolute win for the fans. This is going to be an electric fight because you've got two undefeated high-level welterweights, Shavkhat Rakhmonov coming in at 18-0, all finishes in this fight. This guy is an absolute killer in the octagon, and he's huge for the weight class. And this is a guy who, he can knock you out, sure, but his submission highlights are absolutely insane, even in the UFC. I mean, I think it was his debut, I'm not sure. Comes in, submits Oliveira. He submitted Jeff Neal. He submitted, I think, Wonderboy, Prazeres, Stephen Wonderboy, as I said before. I think Neil Magny as well. So he's got a lot of names on his record. He's coming in and, you know, he should have been fighting for title. So props to him for taking this fight. So let me start with Shavkhat a little bit, because a lot of people see him as just this absolute killer, which he is, but they don't really go further in and understand why. Yes, of course, he's got great power, great technique, great cardio, great chin that he showed in that Jeff Neal fight, which we'll talk about in a second. But for me, his biggest attribute is his fight IQ. And what really showed that off to me was his fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Now, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson obviously is a great karate fighter. I don't believe he was an undefeated kickboxer before he entered into MMA and the UFC. And so Shavkhat Rakhmonov knew that like he completely had the advantage in the grappling and in the clinches. So he forced Wonderboy up against the cage, got him in the clinch. And when he took him down, he did one of the most intelligent things I've seen in a long, long time. And that was he pulled Wonderboy's right arm around him, grabbed the wrist, pulled it behind his back so that as he was putting pressure on him to move him towards the canvas and flatten him out, Wonderboy had no arm to post on and couldn't stop that movement, couldn't stop the momentum. I was literally only using his core to keep himself up. And if you just even do it to yourself, pull your own wrist and try and pull it out, it's such a hard position for your shoulder to actually activate enough strength to get out of that position. And slowly but surely, you know, from there, he gets Wonderboy's back and ends up choking him out. And I just thought that was one of the most intelligent things I've seen in a long time, especially for a guy who could easily go out there and just absolutely go to war. He took an not easier option, but a more efficient, more intelligent, more calculated option in that fight. I just thought it was an absolute amazing performance by Shavkhat Rakhmonov, excuse me. But, you know, in that fight, I want to move to the Jeff Neal fight, because I mentioned just now that his Jeff Neal fight was just absolutely insane. Now, he did get rocked in that fight, I'm not going to lie to you, but Jeff Neal's hands are some of the best in the UFC, in my opinion. He's some of the best boxing in terms of just pure boxing that I've seen in the UFC. His ability to connect with Shavkhat in that fight, even when Jeff Neal himself was hurt, was absolutely immense. And he did have success. But what did Shavkhat do to rally back and win that? First of all, the knees to the body, slowing Jeff Neal down with the teeps up the middle, knees to the body, mixes it up so well and just drains his opponent. If you guys have never even, like, for example, trained Muay Thai, the teeps to the body, even with the belly pad, can take the wind out of you if you're not ready. So just if somebody who's a killer throws that teep quickly and snaps it up the middle, lands the ball of the foot right into the soft part of your belly, it zaps your energy. And if they do that 3, 4, 5 times plus some knees up the middle, your tank is going to empty very, very quickly. I mean, the biggest examples I look at are even when Stipe Miocic fought Daniel Cormier, I believe in that second fight. It wasn't necessarily teeps, but it was those left hooks to the body. You know, Daniel Cormier was winning that fight and he ended up losing that fight within a period, I would say, of a minute or two of Stipe Miocic throwing 7 or 8 left hooks to the body. So the body is a huge part of fighting. And look, I haven't seen a submission like that since I saw John Jones fight Lyoto Machida. I mean, the way Shavkhat was able to get Jeff Neal's back standing up, no hooks in, and just with the squeeze of his arm like this around his neck, was able to put him out cold and drop him to the ground and just walk off, keeping that finish record alive. And yeah, Shavkhat is an absolute beast. But let me move now on to Ian Machado Garry. Ian Machado Garry's story is quite beautiful, if you ask me, because to be fair, he's received a lot of negativity and a lot of bad press just from the fan base in a way that I think is very unjust. You know, a lot of it is about his personal life, which I think completely crosses the line. You know, although you're a public figure, it doesn't necessarily mean that your personal life needs to be criticized or is allowed to be or should be permissibly criticized in the public arena. But no doubt about it, Ian Garry is an elite fighter. He's 15-0. He's got 8 wins in the UFC. He's got more knockouts than Shavkhat in the UFC. So, this is a guy who doesn't have the same hype train, doesn't have the same cult following, doesn't have the same media hype around him. But he's an absolute elite fighter. And I think that was shown even in his fight against, Jeff Neal. Now, it wasn't, as you say, like the most fan pleasing in terms of people who have just walked into UFC for the first time seeing that fight, But if you know the game, he put on an absolute stellar show. His ability to circle around the octagon, to evade Jeff Neal. I mean, this is a shared opponent they have, and the approach to fight is completely different. Shavkhat went to war with Jeff Neal, but Ian Garry, I maybe seeing that was like, you know what, I'm staying on the outside of this guy. I'm popping shots at him. And I think the best technique I saw him throw in that fight was he would wait for Jeff Neal. So he would be circling around and he would stop. Jeff Neal would then go to try and exchange. And sometimes when Jeff Neal, after being chased around, didn't know the timing of Ian Garry would jump in. I think it was with a with a lead knee, jump in, land that to the body. And as he's kind of exiting, follow that up with a right hand down the pipe. So he's, again, kind of similar to how Pantoja was using the body kick to exit, body knee to exit, sorry. Ian Garry's using the body knee to enter and actually using a punch to exit safely. And a couple other times, I think he threw an elbow that looked, I don't think it connected necessarily, but it came very, very close. And that would have been night, if you ask me. But, I think he's just got an absolute wealth of knowledge about footwork, timing. He's got elite striking. But at the same time, in that Jeff Neal fight, he did, as I said, he was circling, and he was very obvious about kind of standing his ground. Stand your base, if you know the meme, in his spot when he was ready to throw and ready to engage. I think Shavkat's going to look at that fight with Jeff Neal and think, okay, he might approach me the same way. I'm going to put more pressure on. I'm going to cut the ring off better than Jeff Neal did. And when he does stop, I think Shavkat's going to have some success fighting in the pocket with him. Now, I do think Shavkat's going to try and enter the clinch with him, trying to get him to the ground and maybe even go for a submission. But, these guys are such elite fighters that I'm not so sure which way this is going to go. But, if I had to put money on it, I've seen both these guys vulnerable, but Jeff Neal for me is an absolute beast. And I've seen Ian Garry get rocked by Song Kenan, and that's no disrespect to Song Kenan. He's an absolute great fighter. I actually picked him in his most recent fight against Muslim Salikov. But he did drop Ian Garry. Now, Ian Garry came back, I think TKO'd Song Kenan there. But, I do see that left hook being a problem in Ian Garry's defense, and I think Shavkhat will be looking to expose some holes in that sense. But I think it's going to be a competitive fight. Honestly, I'm going to make a pick. I'm going to say Shavkhat Rakhmonov, but I would not be surprised if Ian Garry pulls out a win and shocks a lot of the world and stops one of the biggest hype trains I've seen in MMA in a long time. But let me look at what ChatGPT has said to see if we are still on the same page or if I've made some distance between us. ChatGPT has also picked Shavkhat Rakhmonov with the justification of Rakhmonov's undefeated record and ability to finish fights both on the feet and the ground make him a formidable opponent against the rising Garry. I mean, I agree with that, but I think it's more than that. I think Shavkhat has demonstrated his fight IQ in that most recent fight against Wonderboy, and I think he's progressing as a martial artist and as an experienced fighter. But Ian Garry is so elite, so. It's a very close fight for me, and I'm very excited for that fight, to be honest with you. I think on the main card to have those two fights headlining is an absolute pleasure for all media and fans. Let me get some tea here. Oh, I apologize. I'm a little sick, so if the voice sounds a bit bad, sorry about that, but I'm still trying to get an episode out for UFC 310. Oh, that's nice. Yorkshire tea, sponsor me. I would love to do a Yorkshire tea section, Yorkshire tea sponsored section of the podcast for sure, if that could ever be worked out. But let me get back on focus. Now, this is another banger of a fight. It was supposed to be on another card recently, but this is Cyril Gane versus Alexander Volkov. Now, this is the second fight. This is a rematch. Cyril Gane came out on top in their first meeting by winning by unanimous decision, I believe. And in that fight, I think it showed the key difference between these two heavyweights. Volkov is absolutely huge, a massive heavyweight, very, very tall. I believe he walks around at 6'8", 6'9", but he's a thick 6'8", 6'9", and a good technical striker, very powerful. But Cyril Gane, for me, represents this new breed of heavyweight, similar to Tom Aspinall in the sense of speed and agility. No, I wouldn't say necessarily, obviously their fight styles aren't that similar, but their speed and agility are very, very, very distinguished from the rest, I would say. In that fight, Cyril Gane's jab, I mean, it was absolutely electric, did so much damage to Volkov, got him off of his timing, and Cyril Gane does such a good job of firing that jab off beat. Even when he's circling around or on the move, he's still firing that jab and connecting, which just must be such a nightmare to fight against. And he has such a good body kick, a left body kick that was connecting in that fight and was able to slow Volkov down. I just believe that he has the speed advantage. And to be honest with you, Volkov has developed. Let me move on to Volkov for a second. Volkov has definitely developed as a martial artist, especially since that fight. You know, in that fight against Cyril Gane, he kind of looked one-dimensional and kind of stuck. And now that's credit to Cyril Gane for sure. But at the same time, if you look at his most recent performance against Sergey Pavlovich, we've seen a new developed Alexander Volkov. An Alexander Volkov that, you know, can switch stance, go into southpaw, throw quite nasty techniques. He throws that oblique or teep kick to the front knee to try and collapse your knee, similar to the way Robert Whittaker throws it, or John Jones or Khalil Roundtree. This technique that we see where it literally can hyperextend the knee or crunch your knee basically in half and tear every single joint and ligament that you have in your knee. And he's also obviously developed the ability to switch stance. And he's always had that power and always had good technique on the feet. So I do expect him to still switch stance in this fight, especially considering the ability of Cyril Gane to switch stance and throw techniques from either side. But if I had to put money on it, I would go for Cyril Gane by decision again. Now, Alexander's very, very, very tough. He's an absolute elite heavyweight and he's on a 4-fight win streak. Don't get me wrong, I believe Volkov has an absolute chance in this fight. I do not believe it's going to be easy for Cyril Gane per se, and definitely a more competitive fight than the first time, in my opinion. But if you think about it, I think he's had 6 fights since he's fought 6 times since their first meeting. And, since then has only lost to who I would consider the best heavyweight in the game right now, Tom Aspinall. So Volkov is a guy who's really in the conversation for the best heavyweights in the world. And for me, I'm still going to have to go Cyril Gane. I really do believe in his stand-up ability, although people think since he lost to John Jones and that he wasn't really that guy. No, I still believe that he probably has the best pure stand-up in the heavyweight division, but he does obviously have some questions or what would I call them? Questions to answer or some doubts are surrounding his ground game because John Jones was able to defeat him quite easily. And if you ask Cyril Gane, I think even in the countdown or in Embedded, he said that he doesn't even recognize the Cyril Gane that fought John Jones. He just wasn't himself in there. And I'm sure that can happen to a lot of people. And it's probably not that rare of a phenomenon. But for me, I'm going to go Cyril Gane, the Frenchman, to win by decision. What does ChatGPT say? Am I going to win or get a different answer to the AI? No, I am not. Cyril Gane is predicted by ChatGPT, and its justification is Gane's superior footwork, speed, and striking accuracy should allow him to outpoint or finish Volkov in a tactical fight. Well, that's quite similar to what I said, but very short. Maybe I need to follow the example of AI and be less long-winded like I am. No, it's actually very funny. I was on YouTube kind of looking at the analytics of the channel, and there's a new feature on YouTube. I think it's called Ask AI. And I just asked AI, like, is the episode good, as a joke? And it said that I was very repetitive as a host. He said I was a good host, but that I was very repetitive. So I've got to take some advice from ChatGPT and Google AI, I think. But let me get on to the next fight of the episode. And that is going to be down in the prelims. It's going to be Anthony Lionheart Smith versus Dominick Reyes. Now, this is a fight I'm so excited for because I'm a huge fan of both of these guys. And don't get me wrong, right? I know these guys probably are not at the peak of their careers, but let me go through first Anthony Smith coming into this fight because I think it's a very interesting dynamic and story of Anthony Smith. You know, Anthony Smith is a veteran of veterans. I think he's had 58 fights in MMA, 38 wins, 20 losses. And unfortunately, recently, I believe during camp, one of his close friends, mentors, coaches has passed away. And unfortunately, when that happens, it can either make you or break you in terms of fighting, because he's saying in his pre-fight interviews, in whatever you call it, his pre-fight press conferences, that this is going to fuel him. He's angry and he's hurt and he's upset, and when you're a 58 fight veteran in the UFC, approaching, I believe, 36 or 37 years old, you don't have that much time left in the game and you want to go on a title run. He said this is the energy that he needs in this context. He said the last time that he felt like this was before his fight against Gustafsson, when Gustafsson was in his palm, when Gustafsson was still elite, because he was so upset that he had lost his title fight against John Jones that he brought that anger, that just pure anger, didn't come to win that fight, just came to beat somebody up. I was able to submit Gustafsson. And he said that not today or yesterday in the press conference, that he's so upset about the situation. And we send our condolences to Anthony Smith and obviously the family of the dearly departed, because that is such a horrible thing to happen, especially now, especially in the context of approaching a huge fight and just in life in general when you lose people close to you. And this is what we talk about on this podcast, what fighters have to go through in the build-ups to fight, not just the training. But he said, I'm not even here to win. I'm just here to take my anger out on somebody in a legal context. He said, what I can do in there is the only time I can take this aggression out in a legal way, which is such a good thing, such a cool thing to hear in terms of pure fighting. And it comes from an unfortunate source, but if he can use that source well and get a victory and really give his dearly departed friend that moment in the post-fight interview in the Octagon, that's what he said his motivation is. So really wishing all the best for Anthony Smith in this fight. But let me just talk about his fight style for a bit. Obviously, we know Anthony Smith, hasn't had the best performances recently against Roman Dolidze, against Kilo Roundtree on short notice. But if you notice his fight against Petrino, where he was able to get that submission, it was because he came in with confidence, was able to stand in the pocket, wasn't too scared of taking the damage, and kind of pushed him and was aggressive and trusted in his own techniques and abilities to get that guillotine, sink it in, jump the gilly, and as Dustin Poirier would say, jump the gilly, don't be silly, and get the victory. And I think that's the Anthony Smith we need in this fight. And I believe with this energy, with this mentality that he's bringing into the fight, he's got to be comfortable in the pocket with Dominick Reyes and kind of not risk it, because that's what Dustin Jacoby did, as we'll speak about. Don't rush in and just stand there and wait to get hit with that left. But be in the pocket, be comfortable in there, get close him down, get a hold of him, grapple him, do more wrestling, stay safe in the wrestling and dominate on the ground, because I think that's a huge opportunity and window in this fight for Anthony Lionheart Smith. Sorry for the sniffling, I apologize. But if we go to Dominick Reyes, I mean, this was a guy who fought John Jones, arguably beat John Jones. Dana White came out in the post-fight press conference that night and said Dominick Reyes deserved to win on the judges' scorecards. Has come back now with a first-round knockout of Dustin Jacoby. Now, that was an amazing knockout because Dustin Jacoby rushes in, Dominick Reyes leans back and still lands that beam of a left hand he's got from the southpaw stance and just knocks out Dustin Jacoby completely out to sleep. And it was such a good redemption performance for a guy who's been going through it in terms of his fight results. And, he lost to the elite of the elite. He lost to Yuri Prohaska. He lost to these guys that are absolutely at the top of the chart, top of the food chain. And, when he fought Ryan Spann, he got put out quite badly. So the mental resilience to come back, get a knockout of his own, and now be in there with a veteran like Anthony Smith, I still believe he can win this fight. And, if we really look at the best Dominick Reyes performances, it's when he's putting pressure on his opponents and he's putting volume on his opponents, because he has got great boxing and a great ability to just fire that left hand down the middle and extreme knockout power. So I do believe that, if Dominick Reyes wins this fight, it's going to be by knockout. If Anthony Smith wins this fight, it's going to be like ground and pound or submission or TKO. But for this fight, I myself am going to predict Anthony Smith. And there is no way that ChatGPT is following me with this one. I'm such a huge fan of Anthony Smith, just both for his fight career. I respect it so much, but even more so for his media career. The way he communicates himself, the way he expresses himself, not only on ESPN when he's doing the fight analysis, but also on the Believe You Me podcast, which I've mentioned a million times. I'm a huge fan of. But his ability to communicate about martial arts and analyze fights, although sometimes I don't agree with the decisions or the final conclusions he makes, he is a top tier. He sets a standard in terms of MMA media when it comes to being able to speak with fluency about fights and analyze them with a real intelligence about the fight game as a fighter himself. But let's see what ChatGPT says, because there's no way it has the same thing. Oh my goodness, it does. All right. ChatGPT has predicted Anthony Smith to win also. It says Smith's resilience and experience in grinding fights could give him the edge against Reyes, who has faced a decline in recent performances. It looks like ChatGPT's database is a bit aged or a bit ancient, because it probably hasn't factored in the fact that Dominick Reyes is coming off an absolute electric first-round knockout of Dustin Jacoby. But it does say a good thing about Smith's resilience and experience in grinding fights. I do think he has to grind Reyes out here over the 3 rounds. And I think, with that in mind, with Anthony Smith, has he spoken about it before, 3 rounds, he can really push for those 3 rounds instead of having to conserve his energy for a 5-round fight. But super excited for that fight. And I'm going with Anthony Smith to win that. The next fight, I am so excited. This is on the prelims again, and we'll go back to the main event and speak about the main card. We'll speak about that in a second. Vicente Luque versus Themba Gorimbo. Now, I really am very excited for this fight, probably most of all, because Themba Gorimbo's story, if you guys don't know, and if you're not a big fan of MMA, or if you are a big fan of MMA and still don't know, he has one of the most amazing, tragic, kind of hardship stories, challenging backgrounds I've ever heard of in terms of a journey to professional MMA and becoming a professional fighter. Themba was born in Zimbabwe, raised in Zimbabwe, and he lost his mum at 9 years old, I believe, and his father at 14 years old. And then from there on, he went to work in the illegal diamond mines as a diamond miner, I believe. And, it was illegal. And I believe that the police came to shut it down and came to arrest him, and he got attacked by 5 German shepherds very badly. He still has the scars all over him from running away from them, I believe. So he has come from an absolutely challenging background. I believe that Zimbabwe then had a drought. He had to move to South Africa, and I think it was there he began his mixed martial arts journey. And now he's in the UFC riding a 4-fight win streak, fighting Vicente Luque, one of the most, well-known veterans in the welterweight division, a guy who's gone against the best of the best, only lost to the best of the best, and has beat some of former champions in this division, and is always around the top spots in terms of the rankings. When I think about Themba, I obviously think about that right hand, that right overhand knockout he had against Rodriguez. If you guys haven't seen that, I implore you to go watch that. Absolute bomb of an overhand, lands on Rodriguez's temple, puts him out cold straight away. He's also beat Brahimaj, who fought recently, knocked out Mickey Gall. He beat that guy, Brahimaj. He, even in, I think before the UFC, in a promotion called EFC against Chimmy, a guy called Chimmy, he was able to cinch up a really, really gruesome armbar kind of over the front of him. So Themba's belly was actually on the canvas, and he was pulling up from the arm was here, and he's pulling up from the canvas, and the guy had to tap out. So this is a guy who's got elite power, elite overhands, great movement, obviously all the drive and never give up attitude just from his journey, his life story, and obviously the ability to put you out cold. So I'm very, very much looking towards this fight. And let me move on to Vicente. I mean, Vicente is a veteran in this game, especially in the welterweight division. He's trains at Killcliff, and if you know anything about Killcliff, a gym ran by Henry Hoof as the head coach, they just have all the best welterweights in the world training there. You've got Shavkhat Rakhmonov. I know Ian Garry was there. The two guys in the co-main event were there. Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns. You know, they have some of the best welterweights, and Vicente Luque trains there, so he's always been around the top of the top, the most elite. Unfortunately for Vicente, he's 1-3 in his last 4. I think he lost to Joaquin Buckley in that time. Lost to Jeff Neal in that time, but these guys are elite fighters, especially on the feet. Now, that fight against Jeff Neal, that was a vicious KO. You know, Vicente Luque has always been a guy that's been in wars, always been a guy that's taken a lot of damage, especially up top. I believe at one point he actually had a brain injury that was kind of worrisome for me as a fan of Vicente. But, you know, he's still fighting strong. And yeah, I guess, sorry, I was get back to that. In Jeff Neal, that fight, he really took a lot of damage and ended up getting kind of face planted and knocked out by Jeff Neal. But Jeff Neal is a guy that's rocked everybody. I mean, he almost got Shavkhat Rakhmonov out of there, as I already said. So, you know, he lost to Joaquin Buckley, Bilal Muhammad, Jeff Neal. These are not shameful losses. These are the elite of the elite. And for me, if I'm Vicente Luque, I'm trying to replicate what he did against Tyron Woodley. You know, the way he was able to rock Tyron Woodley made him look like he was ice skating, and then ultimately finish him with a choke and put him to sleep. Or even what he did to Randy Brown, where he was able to push the pace and push Randy Brown up against the cage. Randy Brown is also fighting on this card. Push Randy Brown up against the cage, get him in kind of like a guillotine front headlock position, and just throw the knee up the middle, because Randy Brown was trying to put his glove on the ground to you know, transform his position into what they would define in that time as a grounded fighter. But Vicente Luque kind of lifted him up, throws that knee, and knocks him out cold. So if I'm Vicente Luque, I'm looking to bring that clinch to Themba Gorimbo to try and slow him down, to try and get those knees off, and, you know, just use that durability, and go for the win here. I just really believe that this is a great fight. And to be honest with you, my pick for this fight is going to be Themba Gorimbo. Part of it is the story and wanting to see the fairy tale work out for a guy who deserves it so much, in my opinion, all the hard work he's gone through. And this is a guy who's on a 4-fight win streak, you know, really good performances, knockouts, unanimous decisions, dominant fights. So for me, I just believe he's got the slight momentum advantage in terms of, you know, he's a 4-fight win streak. He's building his career. He's getting closer to the top 5 spots, to that championship opportunity. And I want to see it happen in that sense. But for Vicente, I would love also to see him, you know, get back on track, get back to being the elite, trying to get himself into a title shot. But I am going to go for Themba Gorimbo. Let's see what ChatGPT AI says, because this is a competition, baby, and I love competition. Let's see. Here it says, it predicted Vicente Luque, so we can make some distance here, depending on who wins this fight. It says, Luque's elite striking and submission game make him the favorite against a less experienced Gorimbo. Now, I mean, I do agree with ChatGPT, with AI, that Gorimbo's less experienced. But I just think at this point, all the momentum, for me, most of the signs point to Themba winning, and that's what I have down here. What an exciting fight, and what a stacked card. I mean, listen to the prelims, especially even the next fight coming up. Let me have a sip of my Yorkshire tea. Right, this next fight, let me get my notes for this one. Sorry if I keep turning, it's because I'm putting my tea down on the desk. Right, Aljamain Sterling versus Movsar Evloev. Now, this is a fight that's been in the works for a long time. It had to get delayed because Aljamain Sterling had an injury. I was actually quite proud of Aljamain, and I don't like saying proud of Aljamain because that sounds like he should care, or that anyone should care that I'm proud of him. No. All I'm saying is, I think it was just, let me put it this way. I think it was responsible a responsible and good decision that he decided to delay this fight. I know for people who have seen the behind the UFC series that they did, I believe, I don't remember where they did that series, but it kind of showed the negotiations for Aljamain to fight Sean O'Malley in that quick turnaround championship fight when Sean O'Malley won the belt. And he did seem to get pressured a little bit for that fight. And, you know, pressured by Obviously, it was a great opportunity for Aldo to kind of stake his claim to beat Sean O'Malley, to steal that star power, to make more money. But he was injured and he was hurt going to that training camp. And I think this time he got hurt before the original date and was like, no, I'm not doing this again. I'm going to take more time and more care with his career, especially now that he's moved up a weight and he's making a run for the featherweight title as the former bantamweight champion. But I want to talk about Movsar Evloev, because this is a guy who is another undefeated fighter on this card, also 18-0, I believe. And I'm going to go a little bit into his most recent fight with Arnold Allen. Now, it was a competitive fight, but I do believe that he deservedly won. I believe that, he deservedly won. I believe the judges got it right on the scorecards. And I was obviously very impressed with Movsar in that fight for two reasons. Obviously, his grappling ability, which I'll get to second. But first, I just loved the way he stood on the feet. He does a great job of keeping that right hand to his cheek, pinning it to that cheekbone, keeping it close to his face, protecting himself at all time. And he uses his lead arm, his left arm, to kind of keep the range, not only to kind of test the range so when he should enter into the grappling exchanges, enter into a takedown, but also to kind of keep, he does such a good job of throwing that jab with his arm already extended. So when Arnold Allen would try and crash the void, he was able to just unleash that jab. And it did wobble Arnold Allen at one point. So I was very impressed with his lead hand, his jab, and his ability to compete with Arnold Allen on the feet as a guy who you would probably consider on face value more of a grappler, but he's such a well-rounded fighter, and that's why he's so dangerous for anybody in his in this featherweight division, and obviously anybody he's fought, because he's undefeated at the moment. But let me get to Aljamain Sterling. Actually, you know what? Let me just say one more thing about Movsar Evloev. He also did a great job in that fight of throwing the knees. Now, that's like a theme of all of these fighters, all of these great fighters so far, if they mix it up so well. And the knee is such a good tactic if you can do it right. But I even remember seeing Movsar Evloev throw a flying knee against Dan Ige and landing. We all know how good Dan Ige is. And if you don't, get to know, because he's an absolute beast. And he was able to land that against Dan Ige. That is incredible. So yeah, I just wanted to say, just to add that, because he has such a good offensive arsenal on the feet as well as being defensively responsible. So great performance by Movsar Evloev in that fight, which has earned him the shot against the biggest name, or one of the biggest names in the featherweight division, former champion Aljamain Sterling. But Aljo, I mean, for me, he is a severely underrated fighter. Even when he was bantamweight champion of the world, there was always excuses by the media or the fans or the UFC about why he won or why he was in the position he's in. But if you really think about it, Aljamain Sterling is an elite fighter. Obviously, his grappling, his ability to take the back is second to none. But he's so awkward on the feet, and his ability to switch stances so effortlessly. And he's kind of awkward, right? But he switches stances, he throws knees, he fakes knees, switches to the next stance, throws a backhand at you. He's constantly changing his techniques. So you really don't know where it's coming from. And the most prominent example of that in his career, I believe, is his defense of his title at bantamweight against Henry Cejudo. His ability to kind of confuse Cejudo, make sure he was putting enough volume out there, and then eventually out-wrestle Cejudo, in my opinion, too. It just shows for me that Aljo is still really elite. And that fight, his debut in this division against Calvin Kattar, just showed that he can still manhandle these guys and looks a lot more healthy, a lot more filled out, and probably has a better gas tank and ability to take a shot at this weight. What I will say about Movsar, which I forgot to mention, is what really impressed me in that Arnold Allen fight as well is his ability to take the back. And I'm not talking about take the back when they're on the ground and really go for like a rear naked choke in terms of the jiu-jitsu on the ground. I'm talking about from being where I said in that stance with his hand out and his hand up, to then literally connecting his arms, grabbing his own wrist, and able to hold you there on the feet against the cage and then trip you. His ability to get behind you and just hold you there is, again, I want to use this phrase, almost second to none. I haven't seen somebody be able to get behind somebody so quickly and so effortlessly, at least in the featherweight division, in a while. Excuse me, I just had to blow my nose. But for me, if I had to make a prediction on this fight, I'm going with Aljamain Sterling. I think people really underestimate the elite fighter this guy is, and I do believe that he has the ability to take Movsar Evloev's O and, put himself in a number one contenders fight in this featherweight division. Yes, but let's see what ChatGPT says, because we are in competition, and I'm going through this for everyone, especially my new listeners on Spotify. Thank you for tuning in for the audio version. If you do want to see the video version, head over to YouTube as well. But let me see what ChatGPT has said. And ChatGPT has gone with Movsar Evloev with the justification of Evloev's wrestling and control could neutralize Sterling's creativity and grappling. Absolutely agree. But at the same time, I believe that Sterling's grappling is probably, able to cancel out Evloev's wrestling. I just believe that Aljo is that elite, that generational on the ground. I mean, we saw it in his performances against Peter Yan, especially in that second fight. Obviously, that first fight was very controversial for a lot of people. I thought it was fair enough that Aljo won that belt, but he showed that he was a step above Peter Yan on the ground in that second fight and able to control him for that entire fight. So I believe that Aljamain Sterling does have the grappling ability to compete with Movsar. We might see a stand-up fight there. But let me go back to the main card, and I want to explain a little bit why I didn't mention these two, because I do believe that Aljamain versus Evloev was originally on the main card. But let's see. There's got Bryce Mitchell versus Crone Gracie. I believe Bryce Mitchell is going to win this. I'm a fan of Bryce Mitchell. I think he's hilarious. And I think he's one of those people that's very authentic to themselves, obviously. And I love the things he says, especially when he does appearances on the Believe You Me podcast. His stories, the way he thinks about things, his conspiracies, they're just absolutely amazing and entertaining to listen to. And, fans always connect with people who are authentically themselves, and he doesn't switch it up for anybody. But he is fighting Crone Gracie. And I think this is a fight that many people, especially in the media, many fans may question about why it is on the main card and why it replaced Aljamain versus Movsar, considering the fact that Crone is coming off a 2-fight loss streak. And most recently, that performance really didn't look great. Didn't want to engage. And when he did engage, even in his own guard, wasn't able to do anything. So for the UFC to put this fight, I think it's more about Bryce Mitchell. And, for Bryce Mitchell, I was surprised that he wasn't fighting a more, elite fighter trying to get himself back in sort of a title run picture. But he's just got such star power that you do have to put Bryce Mitchell on the main card. And then ChatGPT agrees with me, believing that Bryce Mitchell will win, saying Mitchell's strong wrestling and grappling defense may neutralize Gracie's jiu-jitsu, allowing him to control the fight. But then the final, or the opener of the main card, is Nate Landwehr versus Do Ho Choi. I believe that Nate the Train's going to win this pretty simply. I think he's got such great durability. He always comes to fight. He's a dog. And I think he's just going to overwhelm Choi in this fight, who I believe kind of has struggled with staying consistent. But he does have dangerous striking. So I think it's going to be a good fight, and probably a sleeper fight that many people aren't necessarily tuned in with. But I've analyzed so many fights, and I just want to just give a little bit of time here to Nate the Train. I believe Nate the Train's going to win, and ChatGPT seems to agree with me on that one. Is there anything else I should mention? I should mention that Brian Battle versus Randy Brown is also happening. We've spoken about Randy Brown in terms of his fights with Vicente Luque. Randy Brown is very good, but I believe Brian Battle's going to win this fight. And ChatGPT actually disagrees with me. It believes Randy Brown is going to win this fight. So I'm very excited to see if I can make some distance, make some points up in the final tally that we will go through on Monday's episode after these amazing fights. I did also want to mention that we've got a lot of cool cards, or a lot of cool fights on the preliminary card. We've got Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders, which was supposed to happen very recently, but it had to be cancelled due to Eryk Anders having medical issues during his weight cut. But it's very, very happy to see that Chris Weidman, 40 years old, is still able to make it back from that leg injury and able to get in there, earn some money for his family, and hopefully come out with a win in terms of that fairy tale story. But Eryk Anders is an absolute beast, and I honestly don't know who I think is going to win that fight. I wanted to mention that Joshua Van is also on this card. I would love to have Joshua Van on the podcast one day. I think he's such a cool guy and a very, very good fighter, and I do believe he's going to come out on top in that fight. And also, Clay Guida is fighting Chase Hooper. Now, I love Clay Guida. He's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. Obviously, a veteran, absolute legend of the game. Those wars with Diego Sanchez, I believe. And yeah, for me, it would be nice to see Clay Guida come out on top. But ChatGPT believes Chase Hooper is going to come out on top. And finally, I wanted to mention Kennedy Nzechukwu. He is one of my favorite fighters. His last fight, I covered it here on the podcast, and he's a dream guest of mine. I've reached out to him. Obviously, didn't get any answer yet, but obviously he's a very busy guy, very up-and-coming fighter, very focused, and obviously preparing for fights like this, opening a huge card at UFC 310. But Kennedy, I'm hoping you win, my friend. And yeah, absolute beast of a fighter. So that is UFC 310's card. Thank you so much for watching. I'm very, very excited about this weekend's event. And I'm happy, even though I'm a little bit sick and I've been a little bit sniffly. I hope the listen wasn't too awful. I've still got the Yorkshire tea with me. Sponsor me. Go over to Spotify if you want to listen to the audio version. Thank you so much for all the support across YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram Reels. It does mean the world, especially when you guys are commenting and debating in the comment section. I really want to know what you guys think, and I love to create interactions between fans and the media. So please keep going with that. And of course, thank you so much for watching this episode. I will see you next time on episode 9 of the Backseat Fighter on Monday after UFC 310. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and goodbye.